All right, thank you for all joining us today for the Archival Liberation Vision Board Showcase. This event is organized by the Queens College Student Chapter of the Society of American Archivists and the Archival Technologies Lab at the City University of New York. Queens College is situated on the territories of the Canarsie, Lakawe, Munsee Lenape, and Matinecock peoples. We're meeting through Zoom, which has erected its headquarters in San Jose, California, on the traditional territory of the Mukwekma Ohlone tribal nation. We want to thank the Archival Education Research Initiative for hosting us and creating a space where we can have a dialogue about archival liberation. For tonight's session, we've invited MLS students with an interest in archival studies to submit vision boards that depict how they understand archival liberation as fundamental aspiration for archivists and archives. And these vision boards explain, champion, critique how archives can serve liberatory struggles. We'll also explore responsibilities of archivists as activists, and we invite any dialogue in other areas that touch on the liberatory potential of archives. So tonight we have 5 vision board presentations. Each presenter will have 5 to 10 minutes to talk about their work and ideas, and today's program will run around 45 minutes to an hour. So presenting today, we have David Grace from the NYU Moving Image Archiving and Preservation Program. We have a few presenters from the community-based archives class at the University of California, Los Angeles, and a full list of contributors is on the poster itself that I'll share shortly in the chat. We also have Colleen Rose Fisher from the University of Michigan, and 2 of my colleagues, Eric Silberberg and Maura Johnson from Queens College Graduate School of Library and Information Studies. At the end of the presentations, we'll open the room for a Q&A and discussion, and we wanted this to be an open conversation for folks to share their ideas. We're coming from different graduate programs, doctorate programs. There are a few Queens College alumni here, and we're working professionals joining us today. So we wanted to create an inclusive space for people to meet each other and discuss how archives can be transformed into spaces for liberation. So we'll start with presentations. If each presenter could share their own screen, introduce themselves, their preferred pronouns, and where you're joining us from, and any school or professional affiliations you'd like to include. Starting off the program, we have David Grace, and I'll pass it on to you, David. Thank you for being here.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Amy. So I'm not going to really share. I actually really like this format, so I'm not going to really share my screen. If you want to check out the vision board I made, the link, someone dropped a link in the chat. So yeah, my name is David. I also sometimes go by April. I'm an artist and an archivist. I'm currently unemployed and about $94,000 in debt from attending the NYU Moving Image Archiving and Preservation Program. I graduated this year in May, actually. So the fragmented archive, I'm going to read, I have a 1-page, it's kind of like a manifesto of sorts. That's really kind of the bulk of what I wanted to say tonight. And then I really am interested in sort of the Q&A portion of just sort of discussion, even mostly. So yeah, I'm just going to begin. An archive can overwrite the dominant narrative. An archive can give people access to ideas outside of a suppressed framework that has been put in place to keep the status quo. Performance artists must look beyond the institution's walls and consider archiving and preservation performance art as part of a DIY community effort. As we break from the institution, we can create fragmented community archives where something much more compassionate can form. A fragmented archive is not an archive with missing pieces. A fragmented archive is a way to understand a complex set of numerous entangled connections and what it could mean to play a small part in a larger whole. How should the telling of an individual or collective story be done? There is power in being in charge of creating your own narrative. Do not give that up lightly. Do you want a record of what you are doing now to be available in the future? The use of digital technology and the act of mass surveillance provides an unnerving level of 24/7 recorded audiovisual material. While digital cameras provide consumers with immediate access to content, A digital object's care and preservation can prove much less stable than, say, a physical film. As a performance artist, you must decide how you want your work experienced by others. In recent years, social media sites have been providing a free platform in exchange for your data. But that does not mean that what you are making is being consumed in the way that you had initially intended. Many arts institutions require documentation of your work or practice to receive grants and professional opportunities. Their definition of documentation suitable for submission often includes requirements such as placing a camera on a tripod and recording for 10 to 15 minutes worth of audiovisual content. Video does not need to exist for the sake of the institution. Video has the potential to move a viewer beyond sight and sight. What we envision as a performance artist is a matter of our own perception intersecting with a multitude of narratives and alternative realities. How do you illustrate the act of performance? Maybe what exists is not always video. So what are the other elements of the performance that need preservation? When we talk about archiving and preservation, we are talking about care and talking about resources to carry out that act of care. The creation of art can be expensive. Institutions provide access to their resources to aid in creating or preserving a given work. However, not all performance artists have a marketable commercial practice deemed valuable by the art market or a given institution. When we archive, we must exclude, so equity within a given archive needs addressing. What we have to ask ourselves is, who is the archive's audience? What purpose does the art institution or archive serve? And who is the primary benefactor? And how are these materials used and who have access? Universities are a great source of knowledge, but they are also a business. So I have, I'm going to share two things in the chat. I'm going to share what I just read, and I'm also going to share my thesis paper, which is called A DIY Approach, Creating Access to Home Movie Excerpts, Documenting the Art and Life of Kent Bellows, who was my late uncle. So I'm going to pass the mic to the next performer, or not performer, presenter, whichever that is, Amy, whoever that is.
Thank you, David. Yeah, we're going in order just of who submitted, the order of the folks submitted their work. Next, we have the community-based archives class from the University of California, Los Angeles. And there are a few folks representing that work today. If anyone wants to unmute themselves.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm going to share my screen, and then Jade is going to start things off for us.
Alrighty, can everyone hear me okay? Cool, okay. Hello everyone, my name is Jade Lewandowski. I use they, them pronouns. I am an MLIS student at the iSchool at UCLA, and I'm gonna introduce our archival liberation vision board here. This project was born out of Dr. Michelle Caswell's community-based archiving class. It was a collaborative class effort where all the students, which are listed at the bottom there, participated and offered their perspective on the question of what is archival liberation. We used a Jamboard kind of format, and everyone kind of listed post-its of ideas, which we all organized there. And this was towards the end of the spring quarter, this past spring quarter. So it was kind of reviewing all of the literature and frameworks and conversations that we had been having throughout the spring quarter. Next, I'm gonna have Erin speak a little bit more about the structure of the board itself.
Great, thanks, Jade. My name is Erin Schneider. I use she, her pronouns. I am a first year, going to my second year, and MLIS student at UCLA on the archives track. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the design process that went in behind the vision board. So while it was collectively envisioned by our class, Jade, Sean, Jaru, and I collaborated on a design to try to create a representation of all the information that we felt was important and liberatory. In our design, we picked the method of word clouds. So using this sort of non-hierarchical organizational scheme of sharing ideas and information. While you could read it left to right or top to bottom, we would hope that you could read it sort of in any direction that you want or follow where your eyes lead you. We also have some color coding where we categorize certain ideas, which Sean and Jaru are going to go over as well. So yeah, I'll pass it on to Jaru. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Hello, everyone. My name is Jaru. I'm a second-year PhD student in information studies at UCLA, and I will be specifically talking about what archival liberation means to us. So the word liberation, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, refers to the action of freeing a region or its people from an oppressor or enemy force, and freedom from restrictive or discriminatory social conventions and attitudes, which has been used in the Age of Enlightenment in Europe, liberation theology practice in Latin America, in the Emancipation Proclamation in North America, and many other significant moments in human history. And archives, by their nature, are sites of culture and political power. It is no surprise that the structural oppression is also reflected in the archival context. We are deeply indebted to and influenced by Michelle Caswell's new book, Urgent Archives, in acting laboratory memory work. And we believe archival oppression includes both cultural misrecognition and the maldistribution of resources. So correspondingly, we believe archival liberation should include both cultural recognition and resources redistribution. So specifically, in terms of cultural recognition, archival liberation means empowerment, means the ability of communities to tell and own their own stories, means breaking harmful patterns of silencing and marginalization, and means diverse perspectives on what the world looks like and how we experience and make meaning of those experiences. In addition, in terms of resources redistribution, archival liberation also means material reparations. For example, monetary compensation and return of land, and voices and stories heard, and means using archives for material reparations to Indigenous people and Black people. Now I pass it over to Sean, and she will be talking about the second question.
Thanks, Jaru. As Jade mentioned earlier, this is a full collaboration between an entire class of students taught by Michelle Caswell. And a part of this course, we were able to work directly with some Southern California-based community-based archives. And so when we were thinking about where we have seen or who we have seen reproduce archival liberation, a lot of them ended up being these spaces that we worked with, like the Skid Row History Museums and Archives, or La Historia Society, which is in El Monte. And that this also includes a lot of the writings that we have here. As Aaron mentioned earlier, we have a categorization based on colors. So in the bottom cloud, we have specific individuals, both of who Thuy Vo Dang and Tonya Sutherland spoke to us during our time in the spring quarter. We also have places which are archives and projects that we either worked directly with, got to visit, either online or in person, and projects that we were able to read about, and then writing. And many of these ended up being directly from the syllabus of Michelle Caswell. And one that I like to bring up is We Already Are by Yusuf Umawale, who is the director of the Southern California Library. And this collaborative process was really inspired by just the power of community-based archives being almost inherently liberatory. And while there's always issues within a community archive or without, we feel the inherent spirit of a community-based archive is liberatory. And we're totally open to any questions or comments that anyone has. But thanks for having us here.
Thank you all for presenting. Folks are welcome to put their questions in the chat, and we'll get to them after the presentations. Up next, we have Colleen Rose Fisher, if they're here. And if not, we can wait for them and move on to Eric Silberberg.
Thank you, Amy. And first I want to say thank you first to Professor Lowry for coming to us with this proposal and well, kind of a kernel of an idea several months ago, and bring to our attention the ARI conference in the, I'm part of the SAA chapter here at Queens College. And so thank you, Amy, for doing a great job facilitating this evening. And thank you, Mara, also for your help throughout the semester in the SAA, and a great job organizing us and being a great vice president. So thank you. Also, thank you so much to everyone else that's is participating and taking the time out to, put some of your ideas into something visual on top of work and school and family obligations to then take on something else extra. Thank you very much. And especially thank you to Dr. Caswell and the students of that course for, on top of the coursework and all that stress, to incorporate this project into your already very hectic spring semester. So it's actually really wonderful, and I've enjoyed listening to the two groups that have gone so far. I will share. My poster comes from a experience that happened a few months ago, where a friend of mine who is a lawyer was working on a case involving a police shooting here in New York. And part of that litigation involved a FOIA request to the New York City Housing Authority, and to get some of the surveillance footage to be used as part of a civil suit against the NYPD after the Bronx district attorney denied to prosecute the police officers involved in the shooting, in which Antonio Williams was killed as he was running from the police. And to give you some sense of how reckless the situation was, a police officer was also shot and killed by the police as well during this horrible situation. Quick note before I go into talking a little bit more about what I was thinking about. This image is edited. There's also, it's not showing directly any Mr. Williams or anyone that was hurt. I don't think that would have been appropriate to use for the poster. So this is a time in the evening where, or the frame that you're looking at is not portraying Antonio Williams or the officer that was killed. This is after the shooting occurred. So at that time, my friend who was working on the case received a CDR from NYCHA, the Housing Authority, after presenting a FOIA request for this surveillance footage. And when she received it, it was file footage from the surveillance camera vendor, Genentech. And when they made this material available, the videos were in a .G64X video format, which she asked me to take a look at it and try to help her out to open the video in any video player. But in fact, it was a proprietary format, and you could only use Genentech's video player to review it. And so what the law firm ended up doing to use this, to release it to the press and also to use it as part of the litigation, had to re-record the video as a screen capture as they were playing it in their offices. And so this got me to think, I'd just like to read a little bit of the poster. So a FOIA request was supposed to make this security footage publicly available. So in the end, we were able to, or the law firm representing Antonio Williams's family was able to get the footage, but the actual file was given to them on a conditional basis. And just in the second column here, so Genentech is the world's #1 developer of video surveillance software outside of China. The preference for a garden wall approach to surveillance systems poses a great risk to documenting state crimes. So what happens in the future when the G64X file is no longer supported? And what got me thinking about in terms of archival liberation is the idea that even after material is quote unquote liberated by a FOIA request, its container can act as another barrier, whether deliberately or just through incompetence in the case of Antonio Williams. And sort of an idea that I'd like to throw into the mix is that interoperability with files can ensure sustained liberation. So meanwhile, the Housing Authority was obligated to give the video footage to the law firm. Was it actually liberated to them? You know, what's going to happen in 10, 15 years if Genentech moves on to a different file format? The file, had it not been re-recorded through a screen capture, would essentially stay in a format that only Genentech would have access to. And so that's sort of been my thinking around an example of where archival liberation is extremely necessary, vital, in cases of trying to prosecute whether police forces or other departments and also the idea of a right to information through the Freedom of Information Act. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. And next we have Maura Johnson.
Thanks, Amy, and thanks so much, everyone. Just gonna share my screen real quick. So thank you, everyone. Hi, my name is Maura Johnson. I use she, her pronouns. I am a current LIS student based in New York at Queens College, and also a member of the Queens College SAA. And today, as part of this forum, I just wanted to reflect a bit on some initial research that I had done this spring as part of my capstone project here at Queens College. That really focused on how grief and loss appear in archival materials and how archives may or may not provide a space for individuals and communities to process grief. And I came to this research topic after doing some oral history work related to grief and trauma over the past few years. I think it's important to consider the question of grief and archives within this larger context of archival liberation. Because experiences with grief and loss are deeply personal, and they're also often linked to larger narratives of oppression and violence in our society, and how these stories are told and by whom is often dictated by those who control the historical narrative, which also means that there are silences in the archival record because of that. So for my capstone project, I was focusing really on archival projects here in New York City that had been seeking to document and preserve city residents' experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I conducted qualitative interviews with numerous memory workers associated with these projects locally to just learn a bit more about the types of materials they were collecting, how they were engaging with local communities, and what ethical questions or challenges they faced in doing this work. And through this research, I began to find examples of how local residents here in New York were interacting with these initiatives as a way to memorialize loved ones and process their own loss and trauma. I saw how some archives were expanding their reach beyond just trying to collect materials to be more creating kind of community-focused programming around grief and loss. Programs that were really simply just about creating space for people to reflect rather than collect or maintain materials like a traditional archive. I also learned more about the impact on memory workers themselves and heard firsthand the challenges of doing this work. Memory workers who were often underpaid and were asked to spend long hours processing very sensitive materials without much support. So going forward, I hope to continue to explore grief and trauma in archival practice, how archival professionals should best handle these materials, and how communities directly impacted by grief, trauma, and loss should really be key stakeholders in this work rather than traditional archives, so that they can show how to preserve their own stories in their own ways. And in exploring this topic, I just wanted to reference, I looked forward towards other researchers in this area, especially Jennifer Douglas, Ashley Maynor, among others, who have begun to ask really important questions around archives, roles in preserving materials related to grief, loss, and trauma. And just have a few quotes here. Ashley Maynor is a librarian and archivist, as well as a survivor of the Virginia Tech shooting, and she's written a lot about the role of libraries and archives following tragedy, and how they can be sort of places of refuge or keepers of memory. It's important to kind of create materials and have a space for seen through the eyes of people who are grieving, not just the media. David McIver has also written a lot about the democratic work of mourning and frames the act of public mourning, especially within the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, as a political act. And he argues that communities need spaces and practices through which the damages of disrespect and the complexities attendant to public history and identity can be confronted and to some extent worked through. And then finally, Amelia Acker and Jed Brubaker have written a lot about digital archives and mourning, as well as the implications of increased access to technology in terms of memorialization practices. And they've written a lot about kind of advocating for archives more as a role in the realm of education and putting the tools and power in the hands of individuals to make sure that digital legacies are preserved as personal archives rather than institutions collecting these. And I think this point is particularly important to examine given the sensitivity of such materials and just seeing how standard archival processes may not match the needs of communities and families who are grieving. So in closing, I just want to say I think we should think outside traditional archival processes to support transparent, community-led memorialization practices. We need to challenge established boundaries of what makes an archive and how we manage materials, learning from the practices of community archives and placing an emphasis on how communities wish to respond to loss in ways that are meaningful to them. So thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Maura. And thank you everyone for presenting. A lot of this work has really resonates with the themes that we're seeing throughout the Archival Research Education Institute this week. I'd like to open the floor to questions. You're welcome to put your questions in the chat and one of us can read them, or you are welcome to unmute yourself and just speak. And if there's a question specific to one of the presenters, just name who the question is directed to.
I don't have a question as a presenter, but I have some thoughts listening to everyone's presentations. Thank you for everyone who presented. I'm sort of seeing like a few different sort of overlaps or like through lines with a lot of things that really made me sort of excited. I kind of like jotted down some notes here in terms of like what liberation can mean. And this obviously doesn't encompass everything that people talked about, but these are sort of things I sort of picked out and heard. Talking about someone's own story, like what is their story, and them saying it from them, like from their perspective. Resource redistribution. I heard the word empowerment several times. Direct community collaboration or community was involved several times. I think accountability was a word I'm thinking of when I'm thinking of like police misconduct. And I think asking the question, what are the barriers to liberation, is a really good question to ask. which Eric, I think, was sort of asking, and technology being potentially one of them, and what other barriers we see in the archiving field or in institutional or university setting.
Question for David. I'm wondering about the image that you used in your poster, if you'd be willing to talk more about that.
Sure. So like I was sort of alluding to, so my main practice before I became or went into archiving as a student, I've been a performance artist since 2007. That particular performance was done here in Brooklyn, where I am at. And yeah, so it's sort of, I can actually read, I didn't read this, but maybe I'll read this just because it sort of helps illuminate that a little bit more. As an artist, my work explores themes of labor, control, sexual play through DIY surveillance to question the human body's physicality and resilience. So in that particular piece, it was a video or a photograph taken during a performance action. And I'm really interested in, as you can tell from what I read, thinking about performance as something that happens once, happens live, and then probably won't happen again, or won't happen again in the same way. And how do we sort of capture that in an archiving fashion? Is it through video? Is it through people who are witnessing it? Is it through sort of just like what are the different kind of veins you're capturing the work? And yeah, so the kind of the slogan or poster slogan, you can see one behind me here, debt-free death, but capitalism doesn't care, is sort of reinstating this idea that we need care, people need care, communities need care, trans people need care, queer people need care, people of color need care, but capitalism isn't going to give it to you. That's there. I'm also sort of, I didn't really talk about it here, but sort of thinking about university and capitalism, I did say as a business, and I'm thinking a lot about like labor extraction and how universities extract a lot of free labor in different ways. I don't know if people saw on the news or were on Twitter or whatever, but the NYU grad students, I ended my final semester of school on strike. Our grad student population was on strike for the last 2 or 3 weeks of my academic career. So that also is something I'm thinking about in terms of sort of, labor extraction.
Amy, I noticed that Alan has his hand up.
Alan, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask a question.
Thank you. So my question is for Mara, related to this idea about supporting grieving communities through archives. So I am thinking, when I saw your poster, I get the first idea that popped to my mind is the image of Darnella Frazier. I may be mispronouncing the name, but I'm referring to the teen who recorded George Floyd's death, right? And so, like thinking on people like her, how exactly? Because I am having trouble. I understand in principle how it is important for archives to support grieving communities, but in practice, how would that work? And I thought like maybe thinking on people like Darnella could be like a way to try to land the response.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I don't think I have an answer necessarily. It's something I'm looking for the answer to as well in my research. And, I think that traditional archival practices don't really serve necessarily communities that are grieving. And oftentimes these are also communities, like you mentioned, that have been oppressed historically, are not represented in archives in ways that serve them or truly are representative of who they are. And so I think that it's more transfer of knowledge, transfer of resources, like plain hard cash sometimes, to let communities do the work they need to do. And also there are possibly ways that there are really great lessons to take from community archival practices around trainings on how to preserve different types of media, things like that, that I think are important. But that, that expands beyond grief and mourning. But I think there's interesting processes too, just around, having experienced grief myself in different ways, going through the materials of someone you've lost and what that process is like. Can be also a very interesting experience and emotionally taxing experience. But I think that as you sort through these materials, it can be its own kind of processing of sorts. And I think that it'd be really interesting to see models for how communities support that on a wider scale, and not necessarily for the extent of something to be part of some type of official archive, but just so that individuals, families, and communities have kind of control over those materials and can preserve them longer term. But if people do have examples, especially the student group from Michelle Caswell's class, of archives that you interacted with as part of your class, or other community groups that you've seen doing that type of work, I'm really intrigued and would love to hear examples.
I think one of the first things that came to mind in hearing that question and hearing about your poster, Maura, is the Texas After Violence Project, which we discussed in our course and is on our vision board. And they collect a lot of oral histories of currently incarcerated folks and like previously incarcerated folks. And there's a lot of trauma involved in that process and within that, within all of that work, both for those who are speaking on their experiences of being incarcerated, or they also talk to like families of folks who have been incarcerated. So that trauma of experiencing mass incarceration. And then there's also trauma for the archivists as well, just having to, or experiencing it through these stories and then archiving it, and you're looking over these things kind of over and over again. And we spoke to, oh, I feel bad because I can't remember his name right now, but the director of the archive, and talking about like the kind of care for both the people who are your, thank you, Dr. Caswell, Gabriel Solis, both the care for those who you're talking to, but also the care for the labor you're putting into it. And I feel like I don't really have an answer from here, but it just felt like that was a space that felt very, a space to talk and heal from trauma, even though the trauma is the archive, I guess. Yeah, that's my thought.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think that definitely ties back to some of David's really important points around just undervalued labor and the system that we're all stuck in as well. So.
I think that relates to Jean's question in the chat too. Saying my partner is trained to become a death doula, someone who works with people in the end of life care. This involves doing legacy work to create personal records someone can leave behind for their loved ones to remember them by. Do you think archivists have a role to play in this kind of work, especially with marginalized populations in end of life care? Could this kind of personal work be liberatory on an individual or interpersonal level, or does liberation always have to take place on a broader community or societal level? I think those questions been kind of talking about, Mara and Sean. And anyone else have thoughts on Jean's questions?
Well, that's a really great question, Jean. And I'm familiar with death doulas. I've actually thought about training as one. So I'd be really intrigued to hear what your partner thinks of it. But yeah, just to say that I've been part of some end of life recordings actually, which have been really meaningful to be able to provide that for families. And I don't think that it needs to be something that goes into any archive or, has metadata attached to it and these very specific procedures that we have. I think that can be a service that those of us who are trained in these ways can possibly provide, that there's ways for archives and libraries to step in and offer that. And it can be definitely a more personal level of kind of liberation to have those recordings and that memory made, not necessarily something that needs to be shared or archived or on the community level. There's also a question in the chat for Eric, just around a NYCHA project and file formatting. I don't know if you want to address that now or offline.
I don't think I can, I'm not familiar with this. Well, for one thing, it was the law firm that requested the materials. I'll take a look at this. That's interesting. I don't know. I don't know if, I doubt that case has had an effect on that. I mean, also they were sent another copy of the files on a CD that just didn't work. So the actual, I was not involved in requesting the information or the litigation. And then I think so thank you, Alexandra. Definitely offline is fine too, talk more about that. Curious if you've ever worked with those files before. Congrats to all. This is from Regina. For everyone, how do you plan to take the lessons of archival liberation into the next phase of career life studies or advocacy? I think it's sometimes hard, something that comes to mind thinking about this is that sometimes it's hard to take sometimes some very serious concepts that come up in some, especially, the readings that and books that our friends from UCLA included in their poster. Fascinating case studies and examples. And I think that it certainly gives a good compass to like how to approach a project or to sniff out sort of issues as you're working and not work on things blindly. But it certainly is an issue about how to play your hand correctly, because perhaps if there is something that you're working on that you're not comfortable with, I can think of not exactly like a processing thing, but in other jobs I've had. And it certainly is because if you want to bring something to change that you strongly believe, then certainly there's the strategy involved too, and how to do that. That's something that comes to my mind when reading Regina's question. So I think it's like having that information, but at the same time, how to bring it up and discuss it. I think it very much depends on who you're talking with and how you're talking to them.
I think as I've been attending panels and sessions and stuff through this week for ARI, I've been thinking about, as a current MLIS student, considering pursuing a PhD and wanting to teach, thinking about pedagogy and stuff like that. So I think this will definitely, I'll carry this with me and, kind of the back of my mind and thinking about how we can keep thinking about liberation. And on the vision board that we had created, we had kind of organized it into like the two like kind of word clouds. And one of the distinctions I made, I mean, I'm background isn't like linguistic anthropology, so I'm kind of a word nerd. And so I used the like words like goals, missions, and embodiments. And I just wanted to like explain that a little bit more, what our intention with that was. In thinking about goals, I think of goals as like reaching a certain endpoint, that you're trying to reach a goal, and that once you achieve the goal, you've achieved it. So, you know, an example would be something like access for all, material reparations, you know, the actual return of property, of artifacts, you know, monetary land back, stuff like that. And missions, I was thinking more so something like increasing the awareness, something that's a continual process, that liberation isn't just an end point, that it often might be conceptualized as, well, we can just achieve this right, or, you know, reach this one thing. So I think in terms of what I hope to do in the future, in terms of continual studies or teaching, that'll be something that I'll have to, you know, keep in mind, of liberation not just being a singular thing, but a continual process.
Well, in terms of this question, I was thinking about probably expand the boundary of studying archival liberation, because I mean, most of the discussion today is mainly focused on the context of the United States, and also a lot of issues regarding, you know, race issues, indigenous people, or, you know, because I'm an international student here, so I feel like it's all more like American thing. And I was thinking about what archival liberation mean to other countries. As far as I know, the United States has been established for like less than 300 years, and I feel like the people in power has never been changed, as far as I know. So while in some country, for example, in France and French Revolution, I feel like I was wondering, like, what role does archives play in, you know, liberating people, and, you know, that make a great revolution that changed the whole power structure of the society and the country. So I'm hoping to, you know, thinking beyond the United States and trying to imagine more possibilities of archival liberation in other countries.
I think my answer to this question sort of goes a little bit back to the end of Jean's question as well. Could this kind of personal work be liberatory on an individual or interpersonal, or does the liberation always have to take place on a broader community or societal level? I think, you know, liberation, I think, kind of has to start with the individual, with personal work, personal labor. You have to sort of look at your own world in your own life and see, you know, what things might need to change, or what, you know, views might need to change, or what who you're trying to become. I mean, I didn't really talk about it, but I'm going to talk about it real quickly now. You know, the fragmented archive is also sort of a fragmentation of self. You know, we create many versions of ourselves in society. There's, you know, a professional self, there's your personal self, there's the person that you are around family or certain family members. So there's always this constant fragmentation that's happening in the individual. And I think that sometimes that can be liberated, and sometimes that can also be a struggle, because you're not able to share parts of your life that you wish you could with other people. I know as an artist, it's often, you know, sort of hard. I think that was sort of also why I was having a hard time answering maybe Aaron's question. it's hard to know how, how deep to go, how detailed to get, or if the work is, potentially has some sort of, edge to it that might not be appropriate in a professional setting. Say maybe you have to only share part of that information. So I'm thinking a lot about how information is shared, and thinking about how, how we as individuals share that information, and how we can collectively share that information. And I think, I think that's sort of what I'm looking at. I think, liberation has to happen through continual conversation. I think there's definitely people who already said that, a continuation. There isn't like a one thing, one answer.
I think for myself, especially being able to work on this vision board within the confines of a specific course about community archives, I've focused a lot more on empathy within archives. And David, I really appreciated what you were saying about care, and bringing more care within the archives. And something I've struggled with both outside of school and inside of school, and thinking about the future, is the trap of capitalism almost forcing you to work at certain mainstream institutions that may not necessarily fit your morals, and trying to ensure that the care is there, even if there is loads of bureaucracy and red tape. That care and ethics are always the focus for me, whether it's within a community-based archive or within a mainstream institution. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to, Sean, I really resonate with what you're saying, especially around the limitations and the systems that are around us, and how to push back against that and continue a sense of care and commitment to justice in this work. It's not easy, especially with the bureaucracy and the systems we have in place. So yeah, I'm very interested in conversations like this, where people entering the profession are thinking about ways to push back against that, find ways to care for one another, and to care for materials and communities that go beyond traditional archival practices, because I don't always think those are designed with care in mind.
Yeah, I agree with both Mara and Sean, and I just want to say I really appreciate the creation of a space like this for having conversations about liberatory politics and within the archival field. I feel like it gives me hope for the future of this profession.
And we're just hitting 8 p.m. So I wanted to thank everyone for coming, and thank you for the thought-provoking conversation. You've all brought up some really great ideas and questions, and I look forward to going deeper into this work and exploring all the resources that everyone has shared. Thank you for attending and for taking the time to ask and answer questions. And I want to encourage everyone to take a deeper look at the poster presentations on our website, which we've shared earlier, but I'll share again. And if there's anything else, I think we'll end here. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Take care.